Good morning, Jim Distortion here. Doing a daily short for Distortion's Got Issues. Some of you may have a problem with this video, but I'm okay with that. And if you do have, then let me know. Have you ever uttered the phrase, "I'm offended by that"? What do you expect the reaction to be from people? What do you expect them to say? Do you expect them to immediately flip what they think to accommodate you? Stephen Fry, and I quote, says, "It is now very common to hear people say, 'I'm rather offended by that,' as if it gives them certain rights. It's actually nothing more than a whine. I find that offensive. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. It has no reason to be respected as a phase. I am offended by that." Well, so fucking what? Is what Stephen Fry says. I'm afraid I agree with him. If you're offended by things, that is you allowing yourself to be offended by something. And basically, if you allow yourself to be offended by one thing that's normal in everyday life, then maybe you're going to turn around and be offended at a lot of things, and you're going to spend a perpetual amount of time in angst and indeed agony if it takes you that far. If somebody calls you a bad name and is specific to you, then you can be offended by that. Okay, personal insults, slights, violent actions towards you, yeah, be offended. Yeah, that's when you should be offended. Something happens to a group or a minority that you perceive are in danger and you're offended for them. What business is that of yours? You can be upset for them. You can be, you can feel bad for them. You can even campaign on their behalf as long as you're doing it for the right reasons. But being offended doesn't mean anything, right? So if I say to you, "You've offended me," okay, then we are then in a dialogue about you offending me and why you've done it and why I feel that way. And then that dialogue could then breed results. It's not the fact that a black minority in a small social group has been maligned somehow. So therefore me, as a middle-class white man, will then stand on a soapbox, shout and scream about being offended by it. Why on earth are you offended by that? You can feel bad for them. You can take their side. You're not offended by anything, right? This phrase, "I am offended," is starting to influence political thinking, where basically it should be investigated. If you genuinely do feel that, you're offended by something, then maybe you should take a step back and examine it. So, for instance, I am offended by the way that New Zealanders, indigenous in New Zealand population, have had their rights taken away from them. I'm offended by that. Why am I offended by that? Well, the brutal fact of the matter is that I was born in Windsor, I'll have you know, and I've never been to New Zealand. I like the New Zealand culture of tattooing, obviously. I'm a partner in a tattoo shop. I love and respect that. So what I can't be is offended for that. What I can be is sympathetic. And then that sympathy will then drive me to look into what happened in political interactions in New Zealand. Why I use that, I have no example. I have no realiser. But I mean, maybe that means something to me because it's in my consciousness. But I'm not offended by what happened. I feel bad for them. Also, in a world where more and more equality is happening, race isn't so much of an issue in the Western world as it was. There is no longer black slavery. Yeah, there's still human trafficking to a certain point, a lot of it, women nowadays, through organised crime. But no longer is there, this white man's, privilege. White privilege I don't see as something that stands in front anymore, which then takes away a lot of people's ability to be offended by the malignment of the black race. And why, as a white man from a middle-class background, talking to you about that? I tell you why, because I've watched a lot of videos where black people are saying, it doesn't exist anymore. This whole, white privilege thing on a day-to-day level between you and I, equals in society, doesn't exist anymore. It may well exist as a political agenda and a political tool. Also, left-wing ability to influence people's ideals. So, you know, left wing, right wing, anything too far. So if you're too far left wing, yeah, being a white supremacist is not a good thing to do. You know, it's about individualism. It's about totalitarianism. You know, almost walking towards a dictatorship, but also more self, more involved as a human, as a person. So then you've got the left wing, you know, too far, which takes it too far in liberalism, where there's equality for everyone. But that equality then becomes radicalised. And obviously, you know what that means. It means that then, you know, someone fighting for equality, then where does that stop? You know, who are more equal than others? How does that ever get to the stage where you can look at both sides of an argument? Yeah, you can see, and there's something that benefits everyone. Well, somebody screaming and shouting for equality and then taking it to radical level, there's never going to get that. So, you know, too far right and too far left, they're all bad things. But if you can have a balance between the two of the things, then there's no need for people to be offended, oppressed, have their thoughts and beliefs not considered. And I think that's the important thing. When you're offended by something, you are taking somebody else's belief, turning it round and making it something that attacks you. But normally it's not you, is it? It's a group of people that you have associated yourself with. If you are, you know, in a black minority social group that has been maligned by society, by police, by white people, by whatever, you're allowed to be offended by that, yeah? But listen, sitting on social media telling people that you're offended by their views, it's ridiculous. If you're offended by it, look away. Yeah, turn it off. You've got a browser button, yeah, on the top of your browser on your computer that's a little cross. So what do? You hit the little cross and you turn it off. If you're, you know, you're offended by something on YouTube, turn it off. It's the same age-old thing. Mary Whitehouse, I think her name was a crusader against anything that was remotely frivolous on television. You know, nudity, sex in telly, you know, any of that. She was on it like a fly on shit. Okay, and basically what that was is a form of censorship. In her eyes, people shouldn't be able to see that. But my argument to that is everyone's got an off button, and if they are offended by what's happening, then turn it off. Turn off, you know, what you're seeing, because if you don't, then you're then buying into that. You're pulling yourself into a situation. You're almost building a situation that doesn't exist because you can't use your remote control, or in those days you can't use the ka-chunk button on your telly to turn it over. Have a think about the realities of that. And if you are offended, so what? But then take that further. Analyse when your moral compass changed to such a point that you had to then be offended about what you're looking at. When did you draw a line? When did your mind draw a line and say, that's too far? You've taken that too far. That's not comedy. I'm offended by that. When did your brain do that? Why did it do that? Are you right? Do you have the right to be offended? Because just by being offended does not give you right to do anything. It doesn't give you any rights whatsoever. In fact, it's just a whine. You're just whining, like Stephen Fry said. Understand, yeah, you know, using words like blackboard and chairman and all these other things, you know, yeah, it should be chairperson maybe, you know, it should be blackboard. But, you know, your media, the media is spoon feeding you this stuff to be derisive, to make you angry, to make you offended by what's happening. But if you're too rational to do that and you break things down and make things what they need to be for you to understand them, that's perfect, because then the media then isn't some, you know, lies spouting rubbish. It then becomes a conduit for narrative, a conduit for conversation, which is my pet love, isn't it, talking about that. So if you're offended, I don't care. If that offended nature stays inside your head, makes you take a step back and think about the reality of your situation and how things affect you, and maybe open a narrative with the person who's offended you in the first place. Because then I guarantee, if you can talk about things like that in a calm, constructive manner with emotion removed, then you will be able to find answers to what the actual problem is. Subscribe button down there. Press it for me, please, because then that will help us grow. And if you go up there, there'll be another video for you to watch. Maybe you haven't watched them all. Who knows? I'll speak to you tomorrow.